Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Putting the Story in History. And today we're going to talk about something a little different than what we've been talking about the last couple of videos. We're going to be talking about the revolution in Haiti, all the way back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Why Haiti? Well, back at that time period, this is when all the major first revolutions were happening. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, and several others throughout the world. Um, and um, the one in Haiti is particularly different because it was the first revolution and the first country founded by former slaves. So the people who had been stolen from West Africa um, were in on the island of Haiti were able to found their own country, which was a first in our history. So I thought it was particularly important to talk about. So what was happening? So this revolution happened from 1791 to 1804, and basically what happened was at the time the French Revolution started happening and Haiti was under the control of France. And so, like most of the other areas under control of France, the ideals of the French Revolution were reaching the shores of Haiti. So, the ideas of equality and all men being equal and all women being equal, um, all these different like ideas of democracy and freedom and liberty, right? We're all reaching Haiti, and Haiti at the time was a very structured hierarchical society. It was very much distinguished by class, skin color, and area of origin. So these ideas, when they reached Haiti, really struck a chord with the people who lived on the island, right? There are these rich white Europeans who were in charge. Um, Underneath was this kind of group of, they were called mulattoes. That's not exactly a great term. We don't really use that anymore. But people of mixed ethnicity, kind of in this weird middle class area, and then of course the slaves on the bottom. And these racial divisions um, didn't make sense in this new context of the French revolutionary ideals of liberty and freedom and equality, right? So these people now were upset because the people of France were saying that this is the way it should be, and they were the people ruling Haiti, but they weren't actually changing anything on Haiti. They were still keeping it this rigid and structured, broken down social dynamic. And so that eventually kind of boiled over, and fighting began to start between slaves and the Europeans. Um, and the people in the middle were also joining in these fights. And so it was kind of just chaos in Haiti. Until eventually a man named Toussaint Louverture, wow, I said that really poorly. My French accent isn't great, obviously. Um, right? He manages to take over a significant chunk of Haiti with his forces, and with that, he's able to leverage to a certain point control over part of the island, um, and he manages to do that and kind of quell the fear of the people who used to be in charge by making the slaves and the peasants return back to work. So they went back to work, and the Europeans who had fled back to France were like, hey, you know what? This guy's not so bad. He's not one of us, but at least he's putting the people below us back to work. So that's fine. And so they start to return. And when that happens, it's around the same time. This is when France had kind of fully embraced Napoleon, and Napoleon, not wanting to look weak, decided he was going to start reclaiming areas of French control. And one of the ones he did was Haiti, and so he sends a French force um, to retake Haiti in the name of France. Um, and eventually he ends up capturing Toussaint, and Toussaint ends up getting killed in French custody. So he's no longer around. But the people who were under Toussaint were still in Haiti, and they were still upset that Napoleon was basically just reestablishing the status quo. Right? Revolutions are all about changing things, and Napoleon, who himself was a product of a revolution, or I guess a counter-revolution in this sense, was just reestablishing the old order. He wasn't trying to use these French ideals to change Haiti, and so they ended up fighting back against the French army, and his lieutenants together with their scattered forces were able to defeat the French army for the most part. And what's crazy is the guy who ends up retreating French forces out of Haiti is Rochambeau, which, if you've ever watched Hamilton, is the guy who comes to American aid to assist their revolution, right? He's the one who traps the British at Yorktown with the French Navy. He's the one who's retreating from Haiti, this other revolution, right? He's the one who's leading the French out. So kind of a twist of fate there, a little tidbit that I found really interesting. So it took until about 1804 for Haiti to be founded officially as a new country. And despite the fact that Haiti had become its own country, um, there um, there was still a French presence in Haiti for several years afterwards. They just weren't occupying it militarily like they had been previously. Um, so, so what kind of happened, right? This is the first country founded by former slaves. How did the world react to Haiti? And this is kind of indicative of how, in general, the European mindset has been around these people that they brought to this hemisphere um, under the context of slavery, and now when they've decided that they want to do what they want to do and be free, their reactions are kind of telling. Most countries weren't huge fans of Haiti being a thing. England was, because they were fighting France, so they're like, yes, please do that, weaken the French Empire. So they were kind of um, motivated by their own, own greed and whatever. So they were like, yes, Haiti's a thing. Let's go for it. But obviously, like countries like France weren't super pumped. They didn't recognize Haiti for about a decade afterwards. The United States was not happy about Haiti. It made all the people in the South, right, afraid that slave revolts were going to lead to some sort of um, slave-led southern country or something. You know what I mean, right? It instilled this idea that slavery was going to lead to their deaths and that there was going to be a slave revolt, which there were some slave revolts in the United States, um, but never to this scale. Mostly because of the way that America restricted and tightened um, the rights of uh, slaves and black people. Um, and the way that we still do, which is unfortunate. It's something we're trying to fix now, but slow progress, not great. So anyway, I wanted to make sure we talked about the Haitian Revolution because it was kind of the first, not the first, but it's one of the first major successes of the African diaspora, the people who were taken from West Africa and brought to this hemisphere against their will, and they were able to make a big victory for themselves and create their own nation. Um, and so I thought it was worth covering. Thank you so much for watching, putting a story in history. Next time we'll change gears again because why stick with one topic when you can jump around because you're on the internet instead of in a classroom, right? So thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time for more putting a story in history.